Your Excellency, what is your assessment of EU's recent diplomacy towards Ukraine?
Well, I'll be quite frank with you. I believe that the European Union has made a series of systemic blunders as far as Ukraine is concerned. First, it tried to pull Ukraine into an association without actually taking into consideration the complex nature of the Ukrainian society. The Ukrainian society, for different reasons, including historic, linguistic, even confessional, has never been a homogeneous society.
But what was wrong with a harmless agreement?
It was actually not so harmless.
Why not?
Because an association agreement would have entailed Ukraine to adopt a number of a wide range of elements of the acquis communautaire of the European Union into its own national legislation, introducing norms, regulations, policies, and so on, that would have created a certain difficulty, I would say, to put it mildly, in the economic relations between Ukraine and Russia, and of course other members of the customs union, an immediate neighbor of Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan too. So that those would have been the implications. Our economies were parts of a single economy for decades, and still they're closely linked, interlinked. An association with the EU would have gone far beyond just free trade. Free trade is okay, but
where would it go?
It would have brought Ukraine well into, I would say, the circle of influence of the European Union.
So it is a quarrel between Russia and EU over I want this and you say no, I want this.
No, it's not a quarrel. It's just there was a need to give the Ukrainians, the government and the public opinion, a clear picture what they should expect. And that picture was given by the Russian side, but not by the European Union. And that, of course, resulted in those spontaneous protests that started back in November in Kiev. Now, the EU, after that, supported the opposition without actually taking serious note of who those people are.
Who were they?
It started as a spontaneous protest, I would say.
By the people?
By the people. In the beginning, TV channels, including your own, were showing people demonstrating under EU flags. But gradually, it evolved into something totally different. There were no longer EU flags on the square, but rather those red and black flags of the ultra-nationalists. And people appeared well equipped with steel helmets, flak jackets,
Where did
and
they,
ultimately with firearms that they stole from ransacked police stations and even military units. So that was totally different. But the EU followed that line of support for the opposition as if nothing has changed. Now, we come to the 21st of February, that agreement that was signed by President Yanukovych and the leaders of the opposition and witnessed with signatures by 3 EU foreign ministers, that would have allowed a way out. Though Russia had some doubts at that point, that's why the Russian representative did not sign, because we were not convinced that the opposition would be able, the opposition leaders, the signatories, would be able to deliver, and they didn't. It was President Yanukovych, who delivered on his side by not introducing a state of emergency, by withdrawing the police and the special riot squads, by agreeing to a constitutional reform and early elections at the end of the year.
But the people were not happy with it. It was the will of the people.
Come on, the will of the people, as you see today, is very different. There is the will of the Maidan, which is practically controlled by ultra-nationalists and extremists. And there is the will of the majority of the population who live in the eastern part of the country, who do not recognize. But let me finish the sequence. That agreement of the 21st of February could have provided an instrument for overcoming the current political impasse. But the opposition did not deliver. They were supposed to disarm, hand over the stolen weapons, dismantle the barricades, vacate the administrative buildings, agree to a constitutional reform and elections, and above all, create a government of national unity. They did nothing from that list. Instead, one of the leaders, one of the signatories, the boxer, Klitschko, he went to the Maidan and apologized for having signed the agreement, for having shaken the hand of Yanukovych. And the European Union immediately said the next day, well, this has been overtaken by events, which of course is not fair and is not serious. And the next step, I think the next blunder, was to immediately recognize those new authorities that came to power as a result of an armed coup.
But there was also the parliament involved. The parliament voted for that.
Yes, the parliament voted for that. I do not question the legitimacy of the parliament, though, you know, a parliament where a large group of members switches sides. They were elected on a different ballot, on a different political program, and they switched over. Okay, it was their choice. The parliament never convened in full because many members did not participate. But anyway, they had a quorum. So when they elected a new speaker, Mr. Turchinov, that's okay, but not when he was made acting president. Because whatever constitution is taken on board in Ukraine, the 2010 one or the 2004 one or whichever, every single constitution has a chapter related to procedures of terminating presidential powers. There are three options. One, a president dies. Yanukovych is still alive. Secondly, if a president resigns, he hasn't. And thirdly, a special procedure of impeachment, which was never employed. So, in our view, Yanukovych, whatever one thinks of him, whatever we think of him, of all the mistakes he made and of all the, I will put it straightforwardly, of all the betrayals that he committed, but he's still the legitimate president of Ukraine.
The fact remains, Your Excellency, that a new government's been elected, recognized by the EU. The situation is as it is. What do you want to do about it?
I think the EU was wrong to recognize it.
Still, it's done.
Well, the EU, the majority of EU members recognized Kosovo. That doesn't mean that Kosovo is an independent country.
So you don't recognize it?
The government, no.
What do you want?
We do maintain day-to-day working contacts because we believe that we should not turn our back on Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. But they shouldn't expect political recognition. You know, they promised to create a government of national unity. Instead, Yeltsin comes out in the parliament and says, we are a government of winners, which immediately puts the question, who are the losers? And the losers seem to be people from eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, who, if you look at the demographics, constitute majority of the population and majority of the voters.
What is your current position vis-à-vis Ukraine and Crimea?
We're seriously worried over the situation in Ukraine. The country is in a deep political crisis, and above all, in a deep economic crisis. I think that is not disputed by anyone. So we want to assist a political solution of that crisis without interfering in the internal affairs of the country. On the economic side, we're prepared to work together with the IMF, with the EBRD and other international financial institutions to provide assistance. Of course, looking into the modalities and conditions.
What do you want in return?
Well, we want stability. We want protection of human rights in Ukraine. We want violence to stop. We want the rights of the Russian-speaking population be preserved, not by voting for a change in the status of the Russian language or the latest decision to switch from the Cyrillic alphabet to the Latin alphabet. Why not hieroglyphs?
And if your demands are not met, what happens?
Then Ukraine will, unfortunately, it's not demands.
Expectations.
It's our expectations. Otherwise, the crisis will only be prolonged. Because we are not in a position, the EU is not in a position to convince people in eastern Ukraine to accept the so-called new realities in Kiev.
Your Excellency, thank you.